Hey guys, welcome back to my round 6 recap from the Biel Chess Festival. I had a really crazy game today, still trying to process what happened. And yeah, today is International Chess Day, so I think it was a fitting day to have a really exciting and entertaining game. And let's get into it. So my opponent for this round was Moritz Valentin Kalin from Switzerland. And I checked his games before the round and saw that he has a pretty narrow repertoire. Pretty much exclusively plays the Queen's Gambit. And I played the Queen's Gambit Declined, which is one of my favorite openings against the Queen's Pawn. But I decided to play somewhat of a tricky sideline. And after Bishop g5, the move I almost always play is c6 in this position. If you look at my games online or tournament games, I play this probably 99% of the time. But for this game, I did have a kind of new secret weapon in store. And it starts with bishop to e7. And after pawn e3, I play pawn to h6, bishop h4. And in this position, I play a very rare move just to show the Lichess Masters database. Yeah, this move, according to the Masters database, has been played once before, bishop to g4. Now, this move has been played more times recently, and most notably by Magnus Carlsen. He's played this at least a handful of times in tournaments and a few times online as well. And the point of this move is to put the question to white what to do with the bishop attacking the queen. And white has a lot of options here. There's bishop e2, there's f3, there's queen c2, there's queen b3. These are pretty much the main responses. But I'm really trying to make my opponent commit to a decision early on. And I actually want to give credit to a chess YouTuber, also Grandmaster, Josh Friedel, because he has a video covering this exact position, which I'll link below. And I actually watched the video on my plane ride to Switzerland just over a week ago. And he did a really good job kind of breaking down the nuances of this opening. And he covered the game that I think was played in the women's candidates. I forget exactly who played this move. Maybe it was Tan. But Josh Friedel does just a very good job of talking about the potential dangers of this line and also how to reply as white. So here my opponent played the move queen to c2. And I should also note that my opponent actually had this exact position last year in Biel. His opponent had played bishop g4, and yeah, it was clearly a surprise last year. And I think it was a surprise this year as well, because my opponent took about 15 minutes to play this move. So either my opponent didn't remember his analysis of last year's game, or maybe just didn't check this line recently. Clearly wasn't expecting it today. And yeah, queen c2 is one of the most natural ways to respond to bishop g4. And very often in these Queen's Gambit structures, white is going for bishop d3, knight e2, castle f3, and e4. But very soon we're going to see one of the main points for black in this opening is after I castle and my opponent plays bishop to d3, I'm able to strike right away in the center with the move pawn to c5. And this is one of the points with delaying the move pawn c6, which I usually play much earlier. But in this position, I'm able to play c5 in one go. And the point is really to exploit white's setup with the queen committed to c2 and the bishop on d3. I'm already threatening knight to c6, which would threaten pawn takes d4 and also knight to b4. So white's already under a bit of pressure here. And my opponent continued to take a lot of time. He took about 10 minutes to play the move pawn takes c5. And this position was on my computer this morning before the game, and I was still prepared with move pawn to d4. So, and the point for black is I'm trying to open up the center before white is able to castle. Of course, I attack the knight. My opponent takes on d4. And I'm a bit surprised that my opponent took so long to play this move. It took about 13 minutes, because I'm not sure what else white could have done in the position. But I continue with queen takes d4. And in this position, I had only prepared against one move that my opponent didn't play. I had the engine running in this position this morning, and the engine points out that h3, I think, is the only move that keeps equality for white. And if my opponent were to play this, I was going to play bishop to e6, attacking white's bishop on h4. And after knight f3, queen takes e5, white can castle. And I was ready to play this position. I think the engine will just say that it's equal, but there's definitely still some life left, and black has some pretty good harmony with the setup. But when my opponent played f3 in this position, I was on my own, and the only thing I knew is that the engine prefers black, but I didn't know exactly what the right move is to play here. And I took my first very long think of the game. Here, I do have more time than I started with, but I took, how many minutes? Over half hour to play the move bishop to e6. And I was trying to look for more aggressive and concrete options here. I spent a long time calculating knight to d5, which just leads to complete chaos where the bishops are now stirring each other. My bishop is still hanging on g4, and I have the threats of knight b4 to fork the queen and bishop. I rejected this line because white can castle queenside, aligning the rook with my queen, threatening bishop h7. And I mean, it's a complete mess. I mean, so many things are hanging here, but I didn't feel confident going into this. Maybe it's still somehow playable. Like, what was I looking at? Queen e3, queen d2, and then like takes. Maybe it's playable. I'm gonna actually check with the engine here just to see if this was an option. So I'm so curious. Let's enable engine analysis. Okay, I made the right decision. Bishop e6 is the move to give black the maximum edge, at least according to Stockfish. Knight d5. Oh, knight d5 is losing because bishop takes e7. And if knight b4? Ah, bishop h7. Oh, wow. Maybe I could have just rejected this line quicker and arrived at the conclusion that bishop e6 is the way to go. Anyway, yeah, I took a long time, played what should be the best move, and the game continues from here. So I do attack the bishop on h4 with my queen, and he drops back to f2. And I'm actually down the pawn here because white won the pawn on c5, and now white keeps initiative, attacking my queen and holding on to c5. But I give a check on e5, and then he plays the move queen to e2. And in this position, I took another think because there are a couple interesting options. And initially, I was pretty set on playing the move knight to d7 to attack the pawn and also defend my queen. And I was calculating takes, and it seems like black has good initiative. Attacking the bishop should somehow eventually win back the pawn. If white ever plays b4, then I have a5. But I was looking for other options, and like before going for knight d7, I realized that I have a different move, queen to c7. And I thought it could be very nice to keep the queens on the board, especially because white's queen is not the greatest on e2. It's blocking the knight from developing, which in turn blocks a king from castling queenside. So I actually ended up playing queen to c7, right? Yeah, queen c7. And yeah, it was a decision based on intuition, but also some calculation. Of course, I'm attacking the pawn, but it does get very tricky because my opponent is able to hold on to the pawn, and he started with the move knight to b5, attacking my queen. And I saw this move coming. I played the move queen to a5. And in this position, I was expecting him to play queen d2 to again offer the queen shade. And here I would have been willing to go into a queenless middle game, after which I would play knight a6. And with the rooks coming in, I think black is going to win back the pawn and have a very nice position with white's king as a target on d2. But my opponent played a move that I wasn't quite expecting here, king to f1. And with this move, he is keeping queens on the board, but he's taking away his own castling rights. And he's leaving my queen on a5, and also putting the question how I'm going to win back the pawn on c5. So here I play the move knight to a6, simply trying to recapture and have a good position. But then my opponent plays the move pawn to a3. And this is a slightly annoying move because it makes it so I can't really take the pawn on c5. If I take with knight, I get forked. And if I take with bishop, then, okay, pawn b4 runs into bishop takes b4, but white can take first and then fork. So yeah, white is essentially defending the c5 pawn with tactics and eventually trying to get in this move pawn to b4. But I was trying to generate initiative elsewhere in the position, and I played the move rook to d8. And I was also trying to exploit the fact that white can't play b4 immediately because knight takes b4, and there's a pin on the a file. And with rook d8, I'm trying to set up some eventual tactics with rook takes d3 and like eventually queen a4 and bishop c4, like somehow make this move order work. But it got really tricky because here my opponent plays bishop e1, attacking my queen. My queen is almost trapped on a5. I had to move to a4. And I think in this position, I was fantasizing about the tactics that if white plays b4, I don't have knight takes b4 because the bishop supports a pawn. But here I think I have rook takes d3, queen takes d3, and then knight takes c5 is nice looking tactical sequence where I did sack the exchange, but white can't take the knight on c5 because bishop c4, and I would win back a boatload of material. So my opponent told me after the game he saw this line, and that's why he did not go for b4. Instead, he played bishop to c2. And again, my queen is pretty short on squares. I think here my only safe options are c4 or f4. And I didn't want to trade queens, so I played queen to f4. And my queen keeps getting kicked. He plays g3. I play queen g5. And then he plays pawn to b4. So he finally achieves this pawn chain, and this is a very strong structure against my knight on a6, which is now currently out of play. But here the tension begins to shift from the queen side to the king side. And I came up with a move here that in the moment I was really happy with. And after a bit of thought, I played the move knight to g4. And this is a very tactical move. At first, it looks like I'm just blundering a knight, but if white takes it, then I have queen f6, and I'm hitting the king and the rook. Black is winning material here. So the knight is pretty much untakeable, and I'm threatening ideas of knight e3, but actually more deadly of a threat is bishop c4. And if white isn't careful here, like let's say he plays some random move h3, then bishop c4 is winning white's queen by force because I'm decoying the queen to c4, and then there's knight to e3. And I think we can call this tactic a pork because it combines the pin and then the fork. But my opponent was not going to go down so easily, and he did not allow me such a tactic. And in this position, he plays knight to h3. So trying to keep some initiative, attacking my queen, and developing the knight. And here I really thought that I'm close to winning because the knight is aligned with my bishop, and it's undefended on h3. And the move I wanted to play here was knight e3 check to attack the king, the bishop, the knight. But it's not so clear because after king f2, my queen is still attacked, my knight's attacked, and I didn't quite see how this line could work for me. So after knight h3, I came up with a different idea to play queen e5, offering the queen trade and also hitting the rook on a1. And when I played this move, I was feeling really good because it seems like white is in a lot of trouble here. Like, for example, if he can't take my knight because then I take his rook. And if he takes on e5, then I take back, and I have the double threat of bishop takes h3 and bishop c4. And when I saw this position from a distance, I thought that black is just winning a piece here. But it turns out that my opponent can go into this line, and he did take on e5. And when we got to this position, he played a move that I completely overlooked, king g2, defending this knight and getting off this diagonal so I don't have bishop c4 to win the b5 knight. And when we got here, I was feeling a little bit sad that we traded queens and I'm still down a pawn. But it's still very, very complex because the tactics keep flowing in this position. And thankfully for me, the king on g2 is a bit overworked. It's defending the knight and the pawn. And I exploit this with knight takes f3. So the point being, after king takes f3, bishop takes h3, we trade a bit, and I win back my pawn. And this is what happened in the game. And I should note here that my opponent has drained most of his time. He's fallen below 3 minutes, and this is move 25. So there are 15 more moves to make until we both get an additional 50 minutes. And yeah, things are still very complex here because White's harmony is not that great. White's still a bit undeveloped. But at the same time, my bishop is a bit out of play on h3, and my opponent tries to exploit this with the move pawn to g4. Very simply threatening king g3 to trap my bishop. So I had to act quickly, and I play h5, basically sacrificing a pawn, but ensuring that I'm not getting my bishop trapped. And he takes it. And then I play the move bishop to d7. So I'm really trying to keep the initiative and keep the pressure on my opponent. This move attacks the knight and also has ideas of bishop to c6, where there are potential skewers along the long diagonal. So here my opponent plays knight to c3. And yeah, this move ensures that there's good control over e4 for white. So if I do go for bishop c6, then white can block with bishop e4. So I start with the move bishop to f6. And there's also, yeah, potential pressure on the other long diagonal. So the dream is to get both bishops to shish kebab white along the long diagonals. And yeah, even though white's up a pawn here, black is a one with all the momentum. And I was really trying to keep the initiative, especially given my opponent's time situation. But my opponent tried to resist, and he played the move bishop to e4 here, counterattacking my undefended pawn on b7. So I respond with bishop to c6. And it's a very tricky situation with yeah, the crisscross of bishops. And things get even more complicated after the move rook to d1. And yeah, there's so much going on here with the bishops and the rooks staring at each other. And I have a bunch of candidate moves between rook takes rook, bishop takes bishop, and bishop takes knight. And initially, the move I wanted to play was bishop takes bishop, because after, I mean, first of all, if knight takes, I would win the rook. And if king takes, then I can play rook to e8. Let's say the king moves back, and then I take on e1, takes and takes. And when I first saw this line, I thought that it would be nice for me. I get two minor pieces for rook, but then white gets a lot of active play with potentially both rooks coming to the 7th rank. So yeah, I rejected bishop takes bishop, and I played a different capture in the position, rook takes rook, basically forcing knight takes d1, and then I play rook to d8. So for the last several moves, I've been able to keep the threats coming. Now I'm threatening the knight on d1. And here, I think my opponent was very close to playing knight c3, which would have been a blunder because it allows bishop takes c3. And after bishop takes c3, I have rook to d3, exploiting the pinned bishop on e4 and just simply attacking the king and bishop on c3. So this line would have won a piece. Should also note that if takes, I can simply take back. And again, rook d3 is coming in the end. So my opponent was aware of that, and he played the move bishop to g3. But this still allows the double attack on the 3rd rank. I play rook d3, and here I'm threatening the king and the undefended a pawn. And after knight e3, I take on a3, and I finally win back the pawn. And we enter still a very tricky endgame, but I think it's black who has everything to play for because b4 is hanging, and the rook is very nicely placed, pinning the knight on the third rank. And going forward from here, I think my opponent just kind of collapsed. He started with bishop takes c6, and after pawn takes c6, played the move king e4, allowing me to take on b4. And yeah, my opponent's just living on the increment here. After knight g4, I play knight t5, just solidifying, making sure everything is covered. And yeah, if knight takes f6, I would simply take back and win another pawn. So yeah, it's a very tricky position for white to play with such little time. And now white is down a pawn. He tried the move rook to e1. I respond with bishop to c3. And then he played rook to b1. And after bishop to b4, I'm attacking the pawn on c5. But more importantly, I'm threatening knight c3, which my opponent overlooked. He played h3 in this position. This was move 39, so we were a move away from getting additional time. But after knight c3, my opponent resigned. Very simple fork against the king and rook. So yeah, the game ended on a positive note for me. And I'm getting a flurry of messages, but those will have to wait. So yeah, I think overall it was a very exciting, maybe slightly roller coaster game. I did not really have a chance to check much of it with the engine, I guess apart from that early moment in the opening. But I'll go ahead and switch tabs here. And yeah, let's see what the engine has to say. Ooh, okay. So we see the engine graph. So I was better, and then not better, and then, okay, winning towards the end. So if we can just zoom into the key moments. According to Stockfish, I made 2 mistakes this game. Let me just go to these moments. So after knight a6, a3. Engine says I should have played rook e8, which, yeah, this move briefly crossed my mind during the game. I thought this was a little bit slow though, because my bishops do block the rook on the e-file, but maybe it still works tactically. So I am threatening. Am I threatening to take on c5? No, the engine just says that the rook should come to the center like this. Yeah, this will probably take more analysis. So rook fd8 was apparently a mistake. And then, okay, my opponent blunders with bishop e1. And okay, queen f4, black's still better. Wow. So queen g5 was a mistake. Engine says queen b8, which also crossed my mind, but it just looks like such a bad square for the queen. And if b4? Knight c7. I guess black is kind of untangling, probably b6 eventually, or a5. Yeah, that's hard to judge. I really thought the queen is more effective on g5. Knight g4 is a top engine move, but black is not better here. Wow, the engine says white can take. If check, bishop f5. Yeah, I didn't see this line. Wow. Yeah, some of these lines are hard to spot. So knight h3. So we both made some inaccurate moves. Apparently knight e3 was the best move. I should take. Yeah, some of these lines are very hard to judge. You have to calculate very deeply. Knight takes c5. Wow. I was looking for these ideas, but I don't think I looked at this one specifically. Oh, that's crazy. Wait, king e2? Black's down a piece here. Rook e8, king d1? Bishop g2 traps a rook. Yeah, this would have required like very deep calculation. Okay, so knight e3 was better than what I played, but queen e5 is still playable. And this position is apparently equal. F3 maybe wasn't the best option. I think it was the most practical option, though. And then going forward here, yeah, white was objectively slightly better. But then, yeah, the tables turned. Okay, white should have apparently taken and then played king e2. But after this, yeah, then momentum is shifting. And yeah, so rook b1, of course, defends a pawn. I think my opponent didn't play this because he was scared of the knight getting pinned. But yeah, maybe white has better chances to hold in this position. But I'm a little bit slow to get my knight in. The knight's actually cut off by the bishop. Yeah, maybe I would take, and try and grind this ending. But yeah, king e4, it's a blunder induced by time pressure, and then yeah, very difficult for my opponent to hold on. So, okay, crazy game. Definitely some lessons to take away in these dynamic situations of chaos. I hope you guys enjoyed the game. It was a fun battle. I think this game featured a little bit of everything between a nice opening preparation, very tactical middle game, and then the end game as well. So I'm gonna wrap it up here. Thanks everyone for watching. Tomorrow is a rest day, no classical chess. I do plan to play the Blitz side event though, so wish me luck in that. And I'll be back in a couple days for the round 7 recap. Stay tuned and see you guys soon.